Friends, how are you? Welcome to Changing Tracks. Today with us we have Father Shane. Father, how are you? Welcome.
Christina, thanks very much for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
Could you tell us a little bit about your background, your life?
My name is Father Shane Sullivan. I'm a priest here in the Archdiocese of Tuam, which is in the west of Ireland. But I'm not from the west of Ireland originally. I'm from the United States. I'm from Chicago in the US. But my parents, my dad, is from Ireland and my mom's of Irish extraction. We were born in Chicago, myself and my 3 siblings. I have 2 sisters and a brother. And we moved when I was a kid to Minnesota, and we grew up there in Minnesota. We had a pretty typical childhood. We went to, specifically in terms of our faith, let's say, we went to Mass on Sunday. My mom taught us how to pray, especially my dad would pray along with us. I remember praying every night before we went to bed, and also on the way to school. We would drive into school and my mom would lead us in prayer on our way to school. And I owe a huge amount to my parents, not only for teaching us how to pray and kind of giving us those building blocks for our relationship with God, but also my parents were excellent at giving us a sense of right and wrong and teaching us to kind of strive for excellence, to be the best that we possibly could be. My parents really instilled in us a lot of natural virtues. When I look back at it, I can see that. Unfortunately, I lost a lot of those. I wasn't always faithful to them, but the foundation was there.
Could you tell us about that time in your life when you did not have faith?
I always had some connection with my faith. I went through a very brief flirting with atheism, but like a sort of teenage rebellious atheism, when I was about 15 years old. It wasn't all that serious. It was more just to annoy my religion teacher than anything else, I think. I was one of those troublesome catechism kids. But I believed. I believed that there was a God. I believed that he sent his son Jesus. I believed pretty much everything that the Catholic Church holds out to us to believe. The problem was I didn't believe in it in a way that was in any way real. It had no bearing whatsoever on the way I was living my life. And it had no real meaning for me. I didn't know God in a personal way. I wasn't alive in my faith. It was just something that I would have signed up to. They were boxes that I would have checked. Do you believe in this? Yes, I believe in this. Do you believe in that? Yes, I also sign up to that. But again, it had no real meaning for me. That started to change when I was about 16 or 17 years old. A number of my friends really turned a corner and began to come alive in their faith. And it was due in large part to a young priest who had come to our town. His name was Father Bill Scarich. Give him the credit that he's due. The Lord worked powerfully through this young priest. He kind of went out of his way to be our friend. He would take us out to restaurants. He would take us to the movies. All of this kind of friendship, though, the greatest thing that he was doing really for us was he was giving us a great example of someone who was truly following Jesus Christ, who was living a distinctive life of discipleship. And he was also encouraging us to explore our own faith, to fall in love with it, and most importantly, to fall in love with God. So over these number of years, from when we were 16, 17, 18, I could see that my friends were really benefiting from their friendship with this young priest, that they were coming alive in their faith themselves. I was hanging back a little bit more on the periphery. I was a harder nut to crack, right? I was thoroughly immersed in the world, and at the time, enjoying it, right? But we know that what the world offers is ultimately empty, and it robs you of your dignity. There is no real fulfillment in that. I came to learn that lesson the hard way.
What was holding you back?
I think what was holding me back initially from maybe embracing our faith in a new way as my friends were. One of the things that was holding me back personally was a real, first of all, attachment to even the thin and the ultimately empty pleasures that the world offers. That was all I had, it seemed the best I could hope for. And so to give it up, the prospect of giving it up filled me with fear, that somehow life would be less fulfilling or more joyless or miserable or whatever if I didn't go out with my friends and party on the weekends basically, or if I didn't pursue relationships that weren't in accordance with the plan of God. So those were the things that were really holding me back, and that's one of the things that God really worked to overcome. And he overcame them really by more and more revealing to me just how empty the things that I was attached to, the kind of pleasures that the world offers, so to speak, I increasingly found them to be more and more unsatisfying and more beneath me. There came a point when I couldn't continue to live this double life, professing to be a Christian, a Catholic, and believing in all of these things intellectually, but not in any way living that. And so God finally just sufficiently convicted my conscience where I had to make a choice. And I knew that I wanted to give my faith more of an opportunity in my life, for my life to more reflect what I believed to be true. But again, I was full of this reticence, this reluctance, because of my attachment to all of these other things and my fear that somehow to follow Jesus, to belong to him really, would be in some way for life to be less. It took going to seminary to change me, which is strange. I ended up going to seminary without any sort of real prayer life, and still thoroughly immersed, thoroughly attached to a lot of the things that I had become attached to in high school, kind of worldly things. It was only in seminary that I truly met Jesus Christ, mostly through the Eucharist. And it was only there that he started to detach me from some of those things, that he started to free me, really, to follow him with greater passion and with greater faithfulness. It was there in seminary that happened.
How did you discover the faith or your vocation if you didn't even have a life of prayer? Was it through a friend or a priest? A book?
I'd mentioned before that some of my friends were really coming alive in their faith. One of the things that they, especially the young men, obviously, began to ask themselves was, maybe was God calling them to the priesthood? And I remember them kind of thinking about it, but as you could well imagine, they were kind of divided, of mixed minds, let's say, about it. I had never considered the priesthood, ever. I wasn't fighting it. I wasn't resisting a call from God. It had never entered my mind that I could possibly be called to be a priest, which is strange because, again, I was great friends with this priest, but I never made the connection that I could possibly be called, to live as he lives. So I discovered my vocation. God spoke to me, presented this to me for the first time in a very strange way. I was skipping school one day, which is a strange way to start a vocation story. Skipping school one day, I was missing class, and it was early in the morning, and I had nowhere to go because it was mid-morning in a small town in America, and I was on my own. So I thought, maybe I'll go to the church, which is a strange thing to think, like if you're, skipping school, why would you go to church? But anyway, I went to church. There wasn't mass on or anything like that. It was quiet. We have a beautiful church in my hometown. It's gorgeous, it's brick, the stained glass windows are incredible, beautiful high altar, it's a beautiful place. And I went into the church in order to just go and, as I thought, kill some time, just sort of waste time until I would go back to school later on that day. So I sat down in the pew and I probably prayed an Our Father or a Hail Mary. Again, I had almost no prayer life whatsoever to speak of at this time. But I suppose the real moment of significance for me didn't come in the chapel itself, in the church, but happened as I was leaving the church. As I was leaving the church, in the entryway, as there are in many churches, there were a number of different posters and advertisements. One of the posters that I saw was the vocations poster for the diocese, which had photos of all of the seminarians, all of the young men who were studying for the priesthood on this poster. And the poster posed a question. The poster, written on the poster was this question: if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? And that was the very first moment where I thought God might be calling me to be a priest. And bizarrely, maybe not bizarrely, but it seems bizarrely, considering how worldly I was and how far from God in so many ways. But in that moment, my initial reaction, my initial response was, I could see myself doing that. And then I quickly dismissed that, and I just sort of thought, I kind of laughed to myself. I said, no way, there's no way that's going to happen. But that thought persisted. That thought that I could kind of see myself doing it. That kind of stuck with me. And it wouldn't leave me alone. It came back to me and it came back to me, and it was a great example of God kind of pursuing me, really. I did something that was very unadvisable then. I shared with my now ex-girlfriend that this had happened, and I very foolishly asked her, so, what do you think about that? And she kind of looked at me through squinted eyes and said, are you asking me what I think about you dumping me and joining the priesthood? And I thought, oh, I've made a terrible mistake. The relationship didn't last much longer than that, but all in God's plan, obviously. This thought that I could possibly be called to be a priest, and the attraction that I really did feel, kind of for that vocation to serve as a priest, to give my life to God as a priest, it really wouldn't kind of leave me. It kind of persisted and it stuck with me, and I found it very unsettling. So I thought, right, I'll contact the vocations director for the diocese, and we'll put this to bed once and for all. I'll ask him a few questions. Maybe he'll see through me and think that there's no way I could possibly be a priest, and we'll kind of move on from there. But when I called him, he agreed to meet with me, and he didn't say that. And we kind of struck up a bit of a friendship. We talked more and more at length. He invited me on a trip down to the seminary. And so I went overnight to visit the seminary where these young men were studying for the priesthood. And when I went down to that seminary, I kind of left that experience thinking, I would love to be there. Those men were, on a surface level, they were brilliant fun. They were great. They were men who were full of joy, and yet they were living the sort of lives I really wanted to live. I wanted to live my faith more. I just didn't have the courage to do it. I was still so entrenched in just this nonsense, this garbage that I was living. But they were living a life that was distinctively, the life of a disciple, and asking themselves this brave question: was God calling them to lay down everything and to serve as a priest? I found them really inspiring, in addition to great fun. And I could see myself, I thought I would love to go and study there.
Where did your life go from there? What decisions did you make? What did you do in the seminary? You left your girlfriend. What changes were there?
I went back to my high school, and again, wrestling with this question, still thoroughly immersed in the world. And I ended up breaking up with my girlfriend at the time, later on, as summer approached, and made the decision that I would go and I would try seminary. The diocese was very good. They explained that the expectation that they had was not that I was signing my life away, that I knew I was called to be a priest and that was it. They were saying, they were very reassuring. They said, listen, the expectation that we have is that you will really think carefully there about the possibility that God is calling you to be a priest and that you live the life of, let's say, a seminarian. And again, I had no problem with that. That's what I wanted. And so it was only when I went to seminary that I really left behind a lot of those things those ways in which I was unfaithful, those ways in which I was living a double life or divided. And I really started to follow Jesus in a much more intentional and intense way. But in seminary, I found that far from life being less, because I belonged to Christ and I was following him, it was incredible. It was one of the greatest things that ever could have happened to me. I met the Lord there. I met true brothers. I discovered my vocation, obviously, but the Lord awoke in me a zeal and a passion and a desire to give myself much more, to be much less self-absorbed and self-centered. The Lord filled me with a far greater love than I had ever known before. So far from life being less, because I was following him and pursuing him and living as he asks us to live, it became so much more.
You told us that you discovered your vocation in the seminary. Could you tell us more how you discovered it?
Within seminary, again, as I said, God stepped into my life in a way that he never had before. He became real to me. And I suppose there were a number of things that really spurred me on in my vocation within seminary, let's say. So one of the things that really spurred me on was the example of my brother seminarians. These were incredible, incredible men. Incredible in the sense of being so on fire with the love of God and so eager to spread the gospel. So, they were missionaries in the making. They were just incredible young men, and they wanted so much to pursue holiness, and being around them was infectious. Their joy, their zeal, all of it. I was around guys where all the time I was saying, that's what I want to be like. I want to be like him. So being around that was so edifying for me. I suppose another thing that really helped me turn a corner in my own vocation was I read a biography of St. Ignatius of Loyola. St. Ignatius of Loyola, his story for some reason resonated with me profoundly. This is a man who was extremely worldly, but who totally left that behind. And again, set out with such zeal, such passionate love of God, such generosity and kind of like a heroic spirit that, it just, again, I looked at him and I said, that is what I want to be like. Reading that biography of St. Ignatius was a big, big catalyst for me in my, I suppose, in my vocation in general, but in my desire, let's say, to grow in holiness, especially. The last thing, I was still riddled with fear. The prospect of laying down your life, of dedicating yourself to serve as a priest, still, made me very nervous. Particularly during my first year. My first year, my discernment, you could describe kind of as, me praying and saying something to the effect of, God, if you want me to be a priest, fine, but please don't make me. I don't want to, please. Because I just saw the sacrifice. I saw the difficulty. I saw I was gonna ask everything of me, and that filled me with fear. I couldn't probably articulate why I was so afraid, but again, it was this lingering doubt, this lingering sense that if I left everything and followed Christ, and if I laid down my life as a priest, that somehow life would be less, that it would be more miserable, that it would be just hard and unpleasant. That changed for me in a really beautiful moment before the Blessed Sacrament. I was in adoration one evening in our seminary, and I was praying, and again, I was crippled with fear. And I was wrestling with this question, was God calling me to be a priest? And this sense of not wanting to be a priest, because again, I wasn't free to answer his call. And I was there and I was kneeling, and I had one of the most powerful experiences of God speaking to me, not audibly, but speaking very clearly and distinctly in my heart. And kneeling before the Blessed Sacrament, and again, full of fear, this is what Jesus said to me. In my heart, I very clearly heard Jesus say, "If I am calling you to be a priest, I am not calling you to be miserable." That mightn't sound all that dramatic to you. That mightn't sound like news. It's kind of well, obviously. But that's exactly what I needed to hear. God dispelled, he banished my fear in that moment. I stopped being afraid in that moment, and I started to see priesthood as something that was so attractive and something so good, and something I actually wanted myself as well.
Could you tell us a grace you have received?
I could talk all day about different graces that I've received, but I think one of the most powerful and one of the ways that God has blessed me so much is in a way that's kind of paradoxical, in that it doesn't feel like much of a blessing at all. I am a grade A sinner. Like, I'm a real sinner. You know, I'm a man who's full of weaknesses and who struggles in many ways. But God, I can see, has used that hugely. God has convinced me that in the confessional, there is to be found our freedom. There is to be found our the banishment of our shame. God lifts burdens in the confessional. I know that because I experienced that. I've experienced that so many times. I know that now. I experience it still. And I get to now sit on the other side of the confessional grill, and I get to participate in that. But God has made me, through my own struggles, through my own weaknesses, God is helping form my heart to become far more compassionate. He's making me more like his son in spite of myself. It's one of the greatest graces. I love the confessional. I love the confessional. And it's something that I so much want to be a part of my priesthood. I so much want people to know the good news of the confessional. That in confession, God is not a hard taskmaster. He's not cold. He doesn't hold our sins against us. He is eager. All he wants to do, he longs for us to experience his forgiveness and freedom. And it is experienced in this most incredible way in the confessional. I know that personally. I know that deep down in my gut. And so when I get to speak about it, I think God has given me an ability to speak with a far greater authority and conviction on that, because I know weakness and I know my own unfaithfulness and I know God's mercy.
What advice would you give a person who is going through the same thing and doesn't seem to manage to break with the world? What would you say to them?
If anyone finds himself in the same position that I was in, where you're living this double life, where you believe, right? You would sign up to an awful lot of what, who Jesus is and what the church believes. You recognize those things as true, and yet your life is far from that because you, in some ways, are still attached. You're still afraid to let go of some of those little pleasures, those little things that make life more pleasant or whatever for you. My advice for you is this, is to be brave. Do not be afraid. Don't be afraid to let go of those things and to follow Christ more faithfully. Walk away from that stuff. I'm reminded of the parable, or not the parable, of the story of the rich young man who comes to Jesus. This rich young man has a lot of different things. And Jesus looks at him intently and loves him, and then he invites him to leave all of it and to join him, to follow him. This rich young man can't do it. And do you remember what it said? It said he walked away sad. When you walk away from Jesus and you walk back towards all of the stuff that you're attached to, those little pleasures, those little things that, again, you're kind of, that make life pleasant or bearable, the distractions, all of that stuff is emptiness. And you walk away sad, truly. When you follow Jesus, I have learned this. When you follow Jesus, life does not become less. Life becomes more. When you follow Jesus, you have discovered the pearl of great price. I know this personally, and my advice to you, if you find yourself in that same boat, is to be brave. Not to continue to live this divided life. Who can continue to live like that? How unsatisfying is that? But to walk away from anything and to follow Jesus totally. You will never, never regret that.
Thank you so much, Father Shane. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, Christina. God bless you.
How difficult it is to detach oneself from those day-to-day things. From comfort, laziness, from riches. And how easy it is, on the other hand, to follow Jesus because he fills you, and you don't need any of these things. The difficult part is realizing that the Lord satisfies you, and the world leaves you empty. Yet, with the help of Our Lady, it's possible. So, ask this of her. Ask Our Lady to enlighten you so that you may be filled with God and free from the world. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Thanks.